Hey, Jonathan, thank you for coming on to Tartlecast. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure, and I feel extremely fortunate having the ability to speak to some of the world's brightest minds, especially those experts that focus on things that have a massive impact on a great collective of human beings. And if anyone knows your past, I mean, they would know that your work in economics, just from where you are up in Massachusetts, had a massive impact on healthcare and innovation within America itself. And so it's tough being out in the public eye. And then the hardest part for an economist, from the way I look at these things, and this is just me from my perspective, is that if you output a number or a theory and one little sliver of it goes wrong, the public hammers you on it. It's a tough spot for you to be on. I got to say, there's a lot of muster you got to hold yourself up to and be like, I just got to take it, but I'm going to continue pushing forward because I want to evolve these things for the better. I want to see these things succeed. And you put together a very wonderful collective work on jumpstarting America, right? And it's funny how you use the jumper cables on both sides of America for the cover art. It really gets me because I've broken down so many times. Um, you really do need that jolt. But the question is, where's the thing that's going to send the charge? And that's the beauty of what you talked about here in this book with the work you've done, is that here's the charge, and this is why this charge, this voltage is going to work. And I think that's the really interesting aspect of this. So thank you very much for coming on.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Of course, it's important to point out the book was co-written with Simon Johnson,
Right.
who my co-author, an eminent economist who was formerly chief economist at the IMF. And we really enjoyed doing the book, and we're pleased the reception it's been getting.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, it's duly noted where the work is duly required for the respect, because this is quite substantial. And I want to ask first, before we even get into some of these points in here that I was sort of hyper focusing on, what is it about economics that is the draw for you? What is it about your research and what you're doing? Why is it that you do it? Did you fall into it and then become an expert in it, or you're like, I see the value in this line of reasoning and understanding and then delivering my expertise to the public? What was that for you in your own journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got into economics because I'm interested in public policy and, the generic making the world a better place term,
Yeah.
and spent the beginning of my career as a typical academic really doing sort of highfalutin ivory tower research that largely was read by other people like me, but didn't really move the needle.
Yeah.
And then I was fortunate enough to serve in the Clinton administration in the Treasury Department, and really saw how economics could actually impact the policy process. And when I came back in 1998 from that, I decided to really devote a lot of my career to not just doing this high level research, but actually figuring out a way to translate it into terms that policymakers could use and understand.
Right. That's the hardest thing, is like, you have a concept, right? You've gone through it, but it's like, how do I take that, simplify it enough so that somebody can tangibly grab onto it and then make it actionable for the rest of the public? That's a very difficult thing to do.
It is. It is. It's not something, unfortunately, that's very rewarding in academic economics.
Mm,
In academic economics, really, the rewards are for sort of impressing your colleagues, not for impressing policymakers.
like
So I
that.
think it's really been it's been valuable, and I think we need more of it in the world.
And well, so then how do you continue to evolve that structure that you've seen the value in? Is it through this written material? How do you continue to show that that model which you're speaking about is working? It's actually creating that impact. How do you reinforce that over and over?
Well, I mean, I think that's the fundamental thing. Is in some sense you can't. I mean, the thing about making policy is ultimately it's a shared enterprise. And ultimately you can't say I did X because X came from 100, 200, 500 people working together. And you have to, I am most closely associated with the Affordable Care Act. And I did a lot of the work that sort of was the intellectual backbone for that. But with the actual law, I wrote none of the law. I mean, none of the actual stuff in the law did I write. So, I think at the end of the day, you just have to. This is why I think it's hard for academics. Academia is very much a field where you do your research, you get your article published, you see feedback. Policy is not that way. Policy is you work really hard on stuff and 99% of it ends up in the garbage bin and 1% might change the world.
Yeah.
And you'll never really know. You just got to take the satisfaction that you're part of a process. With this book, we know that the book was read by a lot of people on the policy side and was very influential in the development of a current bill before Congress called the U.S. Innovation Competitive Act, or USICA,
Yep.
which passed the Senate, and they're debating it in the House. And we've been told by a number of people that our book was influential in the development of that legislation, and that's all you can hope for.
All right. Well, then, all right. Here we go. So then, let's get into this then. So we can use USICA as the our little foundational piece. In my total concept of this whole thing, is that you have to spark innovation through knowledge, right? And you have to make sure that R&D expenditure is appropriately allocated so that individuals can take the appropriate risks, and then from that risk create those new technologies or services that actually generate more jobs and then have a larger, more macroeconomic effect on the nation itself or other nations in total. Is that what I'm understanding here?
Yeah, I mean, basically, innovation starts with knowledge,
Yep.
but it's also taking that knowledge and turning it. It's really, as they say, taking it from the bench, from the lab bench to the shelf of the store. It's taking that knowledge and turning to products that people want to buy and make their lives better. And so it involves a lot of basic research, but also a lot of applied research in terms of not just come up with the cool ideas, but actually thinking how you turn them into real goods too.
You talked about this, though, and this is a very good point, is that there's a lot of very brilliant people out there that create these very innovative things, but they are horrible business people. They are bad at actually turning that thing into something that can generate some sort of profit, some sort of return, right? They're actually
Right.
not good business leaders. They can't take this thing and bring it to market appropriately. And
And
what I think,
it doesn't mean that they're not brilliant people or good people. It's
no,
just a
no, not
different
at
skill
all.
set. It's just a different skill set. And
It's not their operator.
right. And the problem with our current system of entrepreneurship is that, really the piece that takes ideas to the market is the piece that's financed by our venture capital industry, the famous venture capital industry in the US. And that industry, recognizing that the inventors aren't necessarily people who can turn it into a product,
Mhm.
has two implications. One is they make those inventors bear a lot of risk in terms of bringing it to the market. And two is the venture capitalists are very hands-on. Now, it's a
Yes.
model that works, but it's a model that has a couple of fundamental limitations.
Well, please. Yeah, I need you to
Yeah,
publicly talk about these limitations
yeah,
here.
yeah. No, this is something I really learned a lot about writing the book. Around, we all hear the hero stories of venture capital industry. 60% of the U.S. market cap is companies started with venture capital, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is, venture capital is an excellent model for investing in software development. It's
Yep.
an excellent model when you have a relatively quick turnaround, relatively low capital investment
Yeah.
idea. Because what venture capitalists do is it's called the spray and pray model. They put a little bit of money, a lot to you and I, but a little bit to them,
Mhm.
$2, $5, $10 million in a bunch of ideas, and hope one becomes a unicorn.
I
Right?
know, it's
That's
hedging. It's the same model they took from hedge funds. It's like, listen,
right.
I can put it in a bunch of things, but one of them will outweigh the losses of the
Exactly.
rest.
Exactly. But what that means is if you come to them and say, look, I have, so the example in the book of Boston Power. Boston Power was a Boston based company making lithium ion batteries, obviously a critical technology for climate change,
Mhm.
doing very well. They had early customers that included Hewlett Packard and Saab. And they went to venture capital and said, look, we want to expand. We want to build a $200 million plant in Western Mass, which will employ 500 people. And the venture capitalist said, no, that's too much money. It's going to take too long to build it. That's not our sweet spot.
Doesn't
Well, the
scale.
US venture capitalist said no.
Yeah.
The Chinese venture capitalist said yes. They
It's
were
'cause
happy to finance it with one small wrinkle. You just had to build the plant in China.
yeah,
So
Chinese
these jobs
importation.
went to China.
Mhm.
And basically, the companies are very successful. And, I can't blame the venture capitalists. They're not bad guys. It's just their model is small, quick hits and hope one blows up. They're not interested in very big, long run investments. And that's where the market sort of fails. And that's where you need more government help.
Right, and so that's interesting. So let's talk about this here. If you don't want innovation to leave this localized economy, right? How do you then redirect the focus of these people that are venture capitalists private operators within this ecosystem coming in and saying, well, this is how we want to do it. This is our model. How is it then you find a way to incentivize them to take that risk to keep things here? To say that, I know it doesn't look like a benefit now because it's outside of your typical spray and pray model, but let me show you that research. How is it that you reinforce that with a proper incentive for them?
Yeah, I think there's two ways you do it. So one is you recognize that some things they're never going to want to do it, and the government needs to step in.
Okay.
So the government has a program called the Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIR.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I got the name right, but I know the initials.
You're doing a good job. Yeah, acronyms.
And they invest in much riskier, much earlier level companies than even venture capitalists do, and they have a terrific track record.
Mm-hmm.
So we need that program should be doubled, tripled, quadrupled. Indeed, this is the bipartisan. Even Marco Rubio has proposed doubling the program. So this is a bipartisan idea. We need more government risk taking, but we also need to thicken the market for venture capital. What do I mean by that? While venture capital is such a hero in the U.S. economic story, it's actually a tiny, tiny bit of the U.S. capital sector. It's like 1/8 of 1% of all capital in the U.S. Mm-hmm. It's tiny. When venture capitalists have more resources, they do take more chances. It's just given their limited resources, they don't want to. So we need to thicken that market. We need to not compete with the private sector because they'll win. We need to partner with the private sector, taking risks. So here's a great example. There's an organization in Singapore. Singapore is a very small country state, obviously, and they have it's a public organization that has very good relationships with the university there. Right. And when there's good ideas that might be products, they become a lead investor. And then they go out to the private sector and say, okay, anyone who comes in, you can be an investor, and the quicker you come in, the better terms we'll give you. And we sort of send a signal, this is a product that we think is valuable, and we've got a good track record.
Yeah.
And they have spent about $50 million, and there's been about $500 million of private capital that's followed them on. So I think it's about the government cannot go out there and compete with private venture capitalists. The private sector pays more. They're smarter. They're gonna leave the government with the dogs. The government needs to partner with the private sector venture capital, and I think they can.
I've seen that here, and I've spoken with a lot of investors. They're always more comfortable being the second person to come in and do the investment.
Absolutely.
They always want someone else to vet it first, right? And just being here in New Mexico, I know for a fact the University of New Mexico, SBIR grants, everything of the sort, and also working with individuals at the national labs is saying, how do we take that sort of intellect, that technology, how do we bring those things to monetization? How do we take the brains in the university, and how do we really, right out of the get-go, put some money into this so that when another venture capital company comes in and they see it, they're like, oh, well, something, they've already taken the risk. The government's helping vet it.
It's not even so much the risk. It's just, it's really, I think it's a little bit of CYA on the venture capitalist front, which is like, well, the government, some other ones went first. If it goes bad, it's not my fault. I was just following someone else.
And it doesn't look bad for their track record too, because they said blah blah blah. I got caught up. Okay, all right, get it.
Yeah. So I think we need more of that. So we need more government. That's on that stage, but we also need to recognize we need more of the basic research stage too, and that's really. That it has to be all government. I mean, basically, the private sector has walked away from basic research. If you look at, we talk about R&D in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
The R part used to be 2/3 of R&D. It's now about 1/5 of R&D, or used to be 1/3 of R&D. Now it's about 1/5. And private companies aren't doing publicly facing research anymore. Indeed, if you look at articles published by corporate scientists, so that's how private companies share what they're finding, they're down by about 60% over the last several decades. And companies like IBM now used to reward their corporate scientists for publishing articles. Now they don't reward them for that. They only reward them for internal work that leads to patents. So private companies have walked back from doing sort of the basic research.
Yeah, but there's
the government needs to fill that gap.
That if you step back from understanding the public, right, you're actually doing more harm to you in the long run.
Right.
It's beneficial, like let's lock in IP. That's going to be our R&D. Well, that actually isn't helping you because you lack understanding of how those things will be used and how you can go into solve and where I should actually put money towards for that innovation. You have to understand the public.
I think that's right. I think once again, it's a hard argument because a lot of people think, well, R&D, that's a private endeavor. But what they don't realize, and, really the first third of our book is history. And it's really the history of how public R&D is what made America great. That really, it was... Public R&D was nothing going to World War II. It then rose rapidly over several decades, spurred by World War II, spurred by Sputnik, spurred by sending a man to the moon. We rose to 2% of the entire US economy. One in every $50 was government sponsored science. And it created the modern economy. Everything in front of you, everything on your phone comes from inventions made during that era. Satellites, modern computing, software development, pharmaceuticals, everything came out of that public investment. But then what happened was we went away from it. And now, where we used to be by far the world leader at 2% of GDP, we're now 14th in the world at 0.6% of GDP on public R&D. And we're suffering. We're not the innovation leaders anymore. And we need to get back on that frontier.
That's funny. I'm glad you said that, because I was just recently in North Cascades National Park up in Washington. They rely on 161 citizen scientists to come in and do the research. Like there's public funding that people will go in to do this so that they can go and do the research. But the thing is, it has a direct impact on innovation, understanding the ecosystems and all those other things for the preservation, right, of those very beautiful areas. You gotta fund, you have to open up the opportunity for people to go out there and be like, if somebody can help me take the time to go learn about something that is really a priority, and then we can find other ways to innovate into it, you need to go focus on it. You have to support those individuals.
Right. And I think, look, you have to do so in a way that is peer-reviewed and involves good science. We don't want this to become political boondoggle. I want to respect the problems with that. But the point is, look, the rate, just take one example. Take NIH, the National Institutes of Health, $37 billion a year investment. The rate of return to NIH is phenomenal. Every $1 invested in NIH yields $3 in stock market capitalization.
Yep.
And we just, $37 billion, we should double it. I mean, boom. We should absolutely be investing more in these sorts of things. And look what we get out of it. Here's one of my favorite examples in the book is what happened with mapping the human genome. Where
I know you talked about that. $3 billion of investment in the 90s went into this specific project. And look at the benefits that have come from it.
280,000 jobs and $6 billion a year in tax revenues.
I know.
So this is a high rate of return. We just need to be doing more of it.
Jonathan, you get me so jacked up. I have recently been trying to have conversations with the National Institute of Health. They have written a couple research papers on social determinants of health, understanding how specific health outcomes happen with individuals on large populations, right? And they've had no decent way to study it. So they wrote this paper on social determinants of health, how they, picture it being collected, the information they want to come together. Well, guess what? I reached out to all 36 of these leading people that have come together to write this paper asking for a solution. I created the solution. I put together all their social determinants of health, and not one of them responded. They have asked for the help. I have innovated something for them, right? With everybody here at Tartle, and they're not paying attention to it. And I'm saying, if you've seen the benefit of saying National Institute of Health, we put money into it, this is the Human Genome Project. Well, guess what? Give them a couple billion more dollars and put it right into Tartle for doing that research and understanding social determinants of health. Have them use that as that tool, right? That's that sort of future. There are great benefits. We just can't ignore that sort of public research. The tools are there. It's about bringing the innovation, right, and the public together to have that collaborative understanding that really ignites, or as you would say, jumpstarts America to that next phase. If we want that same sort of gain we got from human genome mapping, well, let's do it for understanding social populations. I mean, that's just my riff. I'm just upset with NIH, with me personally, because they're completely unresponsive when they've been given a solution. That's just me. Side of the point. I know there's been great tax benefits from all the other investment.
Right.
I want to say that there has to be some attention brought to this. And like you were saying, if an individual can innovate at these smaller scales, whether it be at universities and the government backs it first, and then that can increase that awareness to say that, okay, somebody else is already in it and VCs can come in and actually help them catalyze that further, fantastic. I think that sort of thing is a decent approach for actually bringing back those economic benefits that we need to see. But what I'm also curious about is, what do you do with the flyover states, Jonathan? You and I both know that even in Boston, venture capital is very specific. It's very incestual. How do you get them to start to pay attention to great innovations that happen in the crop fields, of Indiana or the Dakotas, right, or Idaho?
Yeah, this is the other major point of our book. I mean, our book really has two themes, neither of which are new, but I think we're sort of the first to bring them together. One theme is more public spending and innovation. The
Hmm.
other theme is more place-based. We call place-based policies, more focus on spreading the wealth around our country. We are really dividing as a country. You don't just see it in political maps; it's on every map. And basically, what's happening is we're dividing into a country with a small set of what we call superstar cities, where all the innovation's happening.
Right.
Seattle, San Francisco, LA, New York, DC, Boston, and the rest of the country. 90% of all jobs in innovation sectors have been created in just 5 cities over the last 15 years. 75% of venture capital is in just 5 cities. We need to figure out a way to bring the country as big as ours. We need to figure out a way to bring the rest of the country into this innovation economy. We're creating a generation we call a generation of lost Einsteins, of children,
Yeah.
of people who have the ability and the talent, but the VC's not there, the money's not there for them to take that talent and exploit it. So our proposal, and we're pleased to see this as part of the current draft of USICA, is to have a tech hub competition, to actually have the federal government hold the competition, much like Amazon hold their HQ2 competition.
Correct.
But Amazon's HQ2 competition was what we call a race to the bottom. Cities won by showing to give Amazon the biggest tax breaks.
Hmm.
We want a race to the top, which is cities compete to show that they have the preconditions to be the next tech hub. And then the federal government gives them a massive investment that allows them to do so.
Well, I think
So
they
we're not
should.
talking about taking somewhere in the middle of nowhere and giving them money. That's a separate issue. We're talking about taking places like Rochester, New York, Columbus, Ohio, Tucson, Arizona, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, places with excellent universities, large
Albuquerque, New
cities,
Mexico.
well-educated population in New Mexico, etc., and affordable living, and actually affordable living costs, and actually helping make them become the next Seattle. I mean, great story about New Mexico. Not many people know is that's where Microsoft started.
Damn. I'm glad you know your stuff.
So,
You
so
are awfully
actually, Bill
pleased.
Gates and the other Ballmer went out to Albuquerque, and why? Because it was a great place in 1980, whatever, to start a company.
Hmm.
It was great weather, obviously. Sandia National Labs are there, and actually, Seattle was a dump compared to New Mexico at that time. Seattle, there was a sign at the airport saying, "With the last one out, please turn off the lights." The murder rate was twice as high. It was terrible.
Yep.
But Bill Gates decided to move back to Seattle because that's where he was from. Flash forward to 1994, Jeff Bezos gets in his car in New York to head west. Does Jeff Bezos head to his birth site of Albuquerque, New Mexico? No, he goes to Seattle.
Yeah.
Okay, so just think of it. I mean, if Bill Gates decides to stay in Albuquerque, Walter White could have been cooking meth in Seattle
That's
instead of
exactly right.
Albuquerque.
It would have been
You know,
total inverse, right?
and so that's the point. Great places, New York's always been New York. There are some places, that are always going to be, in DC's the national capital. Some places have national advantage, but other places, it's just accidents of history, and we can make those accidents happen through smart policy interventions.
Well, listen, I hope this new smart policy intervention makes Albuquerque boom, because it is one of the most beautiful places I've ever lived. I've been all over the United States. Fortunately, I've made those choices to do that. I've met a lot of brilliant people, and there's just a plethora of brilliant people here, and completely ripe opportunity, fantastic quality of life, and people just don't want to pay attention. I think what you're talking about brings that sort of awareness. It brings that attention. And this naturally brings me to my next question then. And I don't know if this falls under your gambit. Does it truly improve the life of people in the area, citizens, whatever it might be, when this sort of investment occurs in sort of unfounded places that become found? So, for instance, did it really benefit Seattle? Did it really benefit Boulder, Colorado? Right? When these things happen, do we really see improvements in the overall well-being of people in that area? I'm asking you. I am not a professional in
Yeah.
this. I'm not a
No,
local.
this is,
I want
and
to
there's a
know.
lot of work on this. Enrico Moretti is a professor at Berkeley who's sort of the leading expert in this area. And the answer is yes. It benefits everyone, even people who don't have the high-tech degrees, because somebody's got to cut their hair, somebody's got to wash the cars, somebody's got to
Yep.
work, at low-level jobs. So actually, everyone benefits from these sorts of things. Now, at some point, it's not going to last forever. At some point, it may become so expensive. So it's clear if you look circa 10 or 15 years ago
Right.
that in these cities like Seattle, San Francisco, everyone was benefiting. It's not as clear now because at some point it might become so expensive that people can't afford to live there and can't benefit.
Becomes prohibitive, right?
Right, becomes prohibitive. So in some sense, then that's why it's some sense you want to say we got to stop trying to shove everything to Seattle, San Francisco, and find some new places that are affordable, that people can afford to live, but where they can get the benefits of becoming a new tech hub.
Yeah.
So the answer is everyone can benefit to a point. At some point, it might get too crowded and you need to move on.
Yeah. Listen, I was in San Francisco yesterday. Nobody can pay $30 for a meal every single pop. You can't do it.
Well, I mean, no middle class person can. The rich people can.
Yeah, yeah, of course the rich, but it's that small. But what about everybody else? But so then this begs another question then, and you did talk about this, so I'd love for you to elaborate. People think robots, right? They think innovation, right? And they see Amazon, things happening automatically in the warehouse, like, well, that gets rid of jobs. That's a fallacy, and I would love for you to talk about how that is a fallacy. That robotics is going to replace everybody else when innovation happens. They see that there'll be, a couple key workers and then everything else is completely automatic. That's just not how that works. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on that further.
Yeah, I think that, robots are coming, whether we like it or not. Robots are going to replace some jobs, but they're going to make other jobs better and need more and improve the productivity of other jobs. So it's going to require more workers.
Yes.
But the bottom line is, you can sit around and wring your hands about the fact that some low-level jobs might be done by robots, or you can get to work making the robots. Basically, if you have robots replace some cashiers, that you could be sad about the $10 an hour jobs that are lost, or happy about the $50 an hour jobs that are created making the robots if they're made here. Yep. So the thing is, the robots are coming. We just got to make them. And overall, the history of innovation, when the car came, everybody worried, oh my God, it's destroying jobs, people in horse-drawn carriages, etc. History of innovation is the innovation makes newer, better jobs. So that's just historically the fact. And it'll be true with this revolution as well. In some sense, ultimately, it would be a great world if we all could just check out more easily, if people didn't have to work at jobs they didn't like at grocery stores, but instead those people had better jobs in the value chain, building the robots that work at the grocery stores.
We'll just have to do like an Uber of robots. You got ride share. Well, you got robot share.
Maybe that's where it heads. Maybe that's where it heads.
And I think I really do think that's really sharp. And so then let's talk about this thing. You're very forward looking. I mean, you're an economist, for God's sake. Jonathan, how do you see the future then? Does it look positive? And what do you think the catalyst will be required to really open up that truly innovative future, one that will absolutely jumpstart America like you're talking about?
Well, I mean, I think the future is largely positive. I mean, I think obviously we've got the climate change problem is sort of hanging over all of us, and that's going to be an issue. But I think, overall, it's the future's positive. I'm more optimistic about the future because I see public figures recognizing the need, to tackle global warming, which can create jobs, by the way, by investing in renewable energy sectors. But also, this legislation, USICA would put about $100 billion into net new R&D over the next decade, which is a big investment. They put about $10 billion into creating new tech hubs, which is a big investment. And that makes me optimistic that we're going to sort of reverse this horrible trend we've seen in the last 50 years of a shrinking investment in R&D and start moving the other way.
I love that. R&D, that's the future. When I bought your book, I'm doing personal R&D. I mean, that's how I view it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why'd you write it? Because you want people to do the research like you did. That's
exactly
what spurs the ideas. Does it not? And that's why you and I are on here talking.
Exactly.
That's the stuff that we want to understand. And if we can just get the damn National Institute of Health to pay attention to the solution turtle game, I think everybody's going to be great. We want people to live longer. So, where would people, the common person, Jonathan, where do they start? Where do they begin to is it just buying your book? What can they do daily to start to put themselves on that sort of path that helps jumpstart their local communities? What is it they need to talk about? How do they get into the policy? What is it?
I think it is taking an if you build it, they will come mentality. By that, I mean, if you look at people in their communities, they tend to do two things when they're doing sort of business development planning. One is focus very narrow, which is like, how do I get the next plant to locate here?
Yeah.
or focus very vague and broad, like what's my plan to transform my city in some vague, is a bunch of business school jargon. What they need is, hey, if the federal government gave us $100 million, what would we do with it tomorrow? What would we do with the next 5 years? USICA is going to say, hopefully, 10 or a dozen cities will win something like, 100 million a year or 50 million a year for 10 years. What are you going to do with that? And if you have a plan, which is visionary and that it's big dollars, but realistic and that's why you're actually going to spend it, then even if the city doesn't win some new competition, it will motivate the city to try to keep trying to work on putting those plans in place. It'll motivate policymakers to say, wow, look at these great plans my city has. We should pass more legislation like this that creates innovation economies in those cities. So I think it's really about local figures trying to fill that gap where it's a plan that's forward-looking. It's 5 years, not 6 months, but it's also detailed. Here's how much we'd invest in schools. Here's where we build the buildings and how much it would cost, etc. So I think right now there's no incentive to do that because why bother? The cities don't have the money to do it. But if you realize that by doing it, you might generate the federal dollars to support you doing it, then there's a reason to, put that kind of plan together.
It's all about getting the right incentive, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then, after the incentive of people listening to this, I would incentivize them to pick up your book. Where's the best possible place for them to go do that?
Oh, Amazon, of course.
Perfect.
That's an easy answer.
No, I love that. That's phenomenal. And where would they find out more information about you specifically?
They just go to I have an MIT website. Then if you just Google me, it's the first thing that pops up, and you can look at my MIT website.
Yeah, no, listen, I got to tell you, that's phenomenal. And Jonathan, I am much more enlightened than I was, 30 minutes ago. And I appreciate you helping me talk about these items in here. And they're larger pictures, and I'd be more than happy to continue the conversation on each of these points independently. But just the generic overview of what's going on here and what our focus needs to be, you articulated it well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.